Every Sunday, houses of worship invite their flock into their homes. And unlike the outdoors, their homes offer a high degree of certainty. But not so in the UU home. Here, you are invited into a place where, like the weather, uncertainty is its only certainty. Randy Schwalbe, 2020. Mary will light the chalice. We gather this hour as people of faith and joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope as a sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together. Before we sing the first hymn, let me remind you to leave yourselves muted. However, we want you and whoever's with you to sing with Jan and Mary as big and loud as you like. Make it a joyous experience. So let's all sing the opening hymn, O Brother Sun, number 1066. Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist community of Cambria. We are glad you have joined us today. As a Unitarian Universalist community, we celebrate religious diversity and welcome all who journey in search of faith and spirituality. The UUCC is a lay-led congregation inviting speakers from different religious traditions and spiritual or scientific backgrounds to speak in our pulpit. We encourage presentations covering a variety of topics and areas of interest to our community that connect with the UU 7 principles. Today's service centers around the 7th principle. We affirm and promote respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Our 7th principle may be our Unitarian Universalist way of coming to fully embrace something greater than ourselves. The interdependent web, expressed as the spirit of life, the ground of all being, the oneness of all existence, the community-forming power, the process of life, the creative force, even God, can help us to develop that social understanding of ourselves that we and our culture so desperately need. It is a source of meaning to which we can dedicate our lives. My name is Randy Schwalbe, and I am your worship associate this morning. I would like to extend a special welcome to today's guests and visitors. We're glad you have joined us this morning under these challenging circumstances. Do we have any guests who'd like to introduce themselves? Just by raising your blue hand, and Andy will find you.
I can't get the participants window to open. There it is.
Okay. All right.
I don't see any blue hands.
Okay. No blue hands. All right. But if you are not on our mailing list, please visit our website at www.uuccambria.org so that we can keep you informed about all of our activities. And a reminder, if you wish to see this or any of our past Zoom services, again, recordings of these services can be found on the UUCC website and the Facebook as well. And the membership committee invites non-members to consider becoming a member of our community. Please contact Janet Cooper or a board member if you are interested. Thank you. Finally, today's speaker, John Lindsey, has graciously agreed to host a question and comment session immediately following the service. So again, good morning and welcome to everyone. Let us now recite the affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. We set aside this time for any short announcements that would be of interest to our UU community members and friends. Please keep your items short and to the point. For any items that need more explanation, please call or email the person after the service to be respectful of everyone's time. If you have an announcement, please raise your hand by clicking the raise hand button near the lower right of your participant's window. Then when Andy calls your name, click the unmute me button near the lower left of the participant's window and then speak.
Do we have any announcements in the sanctuary? Okay. Anita, please unmute yourself and share your announcement.
Hello, good morning. I have a great announcement. Can you hear me? Okay. The Vineyard Church offering meals for Thanksgiving. They will order the meals from restaurants. So you can call Anne from the church. And her phone number is 440-3004. And I believe Lori will send you the announcement in the newsletter. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita.
You're welcome.
Treva, please unmute yourself and make your announcement. I have to unmute you. Okay. I'm trying. Let me find you in the window here.
Can't you go? Can you do it in the participant screen?
I can do it on the participant screen. Good. Okay. Ask to unmute. I've asked to unmute you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good morning all. A couple of announcements. First, next Sunday is the annual congregation meeting to follow the service, so please stick around. I hope you've received your ballot in the mail so you can vote on the board members and then also on a couple of other items. Second announcement, I received an email from Alan Brovar. There is a Thanksgiving interfaith service on Sunday, November 15th. So that's also next Sunday, but it's at 3 o'clock. I am going to have Lori forward this to all the congregation members. So if you're interested in attending that, you will be able to. And then my last announcement, obviously I'm having some technical difficulties, so please bear with me.
We will. Thank you, Treva. And Chris Fox, please unmute yourself and make your announcement.
We have one more weekend to collect food for the Thanksgiving baskets, and the church will be open from noon to 12:30 till 2 next week Saturday. And we've had a really wonderful response to the drive so far. We have a lot of food at church right now, And I just want to thank everyone for participating and for the generosity that you share with our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Diane DeMarco, please unmute yourself and share your announcement.
Yeah, the women's group, the first women's group has decided that it was time to discontinue. We've been meeting now for about 9 years, and we've decided that it's time to move on. And we've also decided that we want to continue a new group or start a new group actually in January. So that'll be the first Monday of the month from 2 to 3:30. And that will include Margaret's group. I've spoken to Margaret about it, and she would like to combine them. And it will be a social group and what's up for you type of group. And as I said, it will be a drop-in group. So I will be announcing this periodically up until January and hope that you can join us if you are a woman. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. I don't see any other hands up, so Randy, back to you.
Okay. Next week, Marianne Anderson will present Human Touch. Sharing together some of our personal and significant joys and concerns brings us closer as a faith community. We invite you to share the milestones that are deeply felt as a part of your personal life. But please be mindful and considerate of all who come to worship with us this morning. This is a time of community building.
How sure a thing is beauty, I cried no book can say, nor wave nor shock despoil her, nor ravicious dismay. The granite hills are slender, the sea more like to fail. Behind the rose, the planet, the law behind the veil.
Today's sermon is titled, What is Going On with Our Climate and Weather? To be delivered by John Lindsey. I once asked John what the difference is between weather and climate. He told me, you can't weather a tree, but you can climb it. Sorry, John. John Lindsey is a media relations representative and marine meteorologist for Pacific Gas and Electric Company at Diablo Canyon Power Plant. He has worked for PG&E for more than 17 years. He has forecast weather and oceanographic conditions along the central coast of California for over 28 years. His forecasts can be heard every morning on 920 KVEC radio. He writes a weekly column on weather and oceanography that appears in Sunday's edition of the San Luis Obispo Tribune, Santa Maria Times, Long Park Record, and the Santa Ynez Valley News. He conducts tours of Diablo Canyon and speaks in the community, reaching nearly 10,000 customers per year. And he is on the board of directors of the Point San Luis Lighthouse Keepers, Central Coast Aquarium, PG&E Veterans Employee Resource Group, and the Lost at Sea Committee. Prior to working with PG&E, John was a marine meteorologist and research scientist with Tenera Environmental. He served in the U.S. Navy for over 24 years. He attended Santa Rosa Junior College and Cal Poly at San Luis Obispo. He successfully completed the U.S. Naval Aviation Meteorology and Oceanography program at Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Florida. And last December, John broke into show business, delivering a stirring reading of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" at the Atascadero Community Band's Christmas concert. His performance was highly acclaimed. Look out, Broadway. He and his lovely wife, Trish, currently live in Los Osos, California. They have 2 children, Chloe, 21, and Sean, 15. And Chloe just graduated from the Naval Nuclear Power School in Goose Creek, South Carolina. And now, from Charleston, South Carolina, I give you her proud papa, John Lindsey.
All right, Randy, can you hear me okay and see the PowerPoint?
We
Yes,
can see,
do. Yes, we can.
Okay,
yes.
then I will press on then. Here, here we go. So I took this picture in Valencia Peak, and this is Sean and Chloe and Trish, my wife. And I took this photograph yesterday here at South Carolina. And Trish is, to me, a walking miracle. If you ever wondered if there really is a higher power or God, I think she's living proof there is. Back on February the 8th, she had a stroke, referred to as an AVM, and she was in a medically induced coma for 12 days. And it was the longest period of my whole life because we didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And one of the doctors there told us that she would probably never walk again. She would probably have a trach for the rest of her life, a feeding tube, and she would lose all cognitive ability. And just absolutely heartbroken. And when she woke up, you know, we were asking her questions and she was squeezing my hand because she still had a ventilator. And it was funny because she goes, John, why are you asking me these crazy questions? That did you know who Chloe was, or did you know who Sean was? And she's about 100%. I mean, she walks with a bit of a limp, and she has some paralysis in her right hand, but it's coming back. So if you ever wonder if there really is a God, if God really exists, you just look at Trish, and for me, that's my miracle. All right. Okay, I'd give you a quick weather report. Everybody has always asked about that. And we're definitely in a moderate La Nina condition, which, let me go to La Nina here, which means that during an El Nino condition, the jet stream takes a more southerly route, and consequently, we get more rain. With the La Nina condition, the jet stream, the upper level winds, the steering winds, the mechanism that brings storms to the Central Coast tends to be further north. And what happens is that we have drier weather on average in our part of the state, and it tends to be wetter up in the Pacific Northwest, up in Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. That's pretty much the scenario. Now, there have been La Nina years that have been very wet along the Central Coast, but about 82% of the time, when we're in a La Nina condition, it's usually below average rainfall for us. Now, this is from the Climate Prediction Center, and this is for the months of November, December, and January. And they're predicting that we'll have, once again, above average temperatures here in most of California. And then, unfortunately, we'll probably have below average rainfall. If you get up to Northern California, far Northern California and Oregon, EC means equal chance, and then up in the Pacific Northwest, above average rainfall. Okay, I always treat this with a lot of humor because when I write about climate change, I get a lot of pretty wild emails, to say the least. So what am I doing? Well, I'm shoveling 36 inches of global warming. And in many other parts of the country, climate scientists are depicted as being kind of crazy. And when I write columns about climate change, I get emails like this. Now, for reasons unknown, you fall into goose step with the wacko liberal global warming municipals, and your credibility is virtually shot. So you got to have a thick hide when you write about climate change, all right? When you write a column like today's, you show yourself to be a corporate shrill. Is it worth a paycheck to sell out your fellow human beings? You disgust me, all right? So, but I take it with a grain of salt. It's all good to me. And the reason being is that fossil fuels built this country. They absolutely have. And this is a picture in Montana, and every one of these railroad cars is hauling coal. You know, we still use a lot of coal to generate electricity. And I didn't know this. I was doing some research on this. You know, the train companies, more than half of their business is hauling coal. So consequently, they probably won't be very receptive as far as climate change. And there's so many other jobs throughout the country that are dependent upon fossil fuels. And when you mess around with people's livelihoods, that it tends to be pretty sensitive. So it's very understandable. Okay, questioning climate change, the 7 deadly sins. First one, the sun's responsible. It's a natural cycle. The earth is not warm since 1998. Carbon dioxide is just a trace gas. They said it was cooling in the 1970s. You might remember that. It's snowing somewhere. It doesn't matter where it's snowing. How can it be getting hotter? The thermometers are all wrong. And the climate scientists are just, they're just bent on evil. And you might remember this picture. This is Ted Kaczynski. It was the Unabomber. And I saw this billboard in Pennsylvania in coal country. And I still believe in global warming, do you? All right. So once again, you're depicted as kind of being kind of a crazy person. Okay. However, and I just downloaded this image today. This is basically the estimated percent of adults who are interested in stories about impacts of global warming. And you can see that California is really on the forefront. A lot of people are really concerned about climate change and want to know more, where other parts of the country, not so much so. And how do we know what happened back in the future or back in the past? And you can look at tree rings, you can look at coral. Best way is to look at ice core sampling, either from Greenland or especially from Antarctica, where we could go back now about 700,000 years in the past. What happens is that little macroscopic air bubbles are trapped in the ice. And as it snows, more air bubbles, and go back 700,000 years. When you look at those air bubbles, you can determine what the CO2 level was of the atmosphere back then, and also determine what the temperature was by looking at different isotopes of oxygen molecules. And if there's one graph you should remember from this presentation, it's this one. And this stretches back about 500,000 years. And this is the historic level of CO2, right around 300 parts per million. And then currently we're about 417 parts per million. And it's beyond hockey stick. It's just straight up, as you can see. But notice something. You can see these other cycles that are taking place. About every 100,000 years, you see one of these cycles. And these are natural occurring cycles of temperature change and CO2 levels. And then also you see other cycles like at 46,000 years and at 26,000 years, or 41 to 26,000 years. And the reason being is these different patterns. And I'll show you the first one. Eclecticity is the Earth's orbit's not perfect. It basically cycles about every 100,000 years. So if you went back to that previous graph, you could actually see that 100,000 year change. And also the changes in the Earth's axial tilt, that's around 41,000 years. And all these cycles absolutely produce climate change. But it's over 100,000 years or 41,000 years or 26,000 years. Here's the next one called precession. It's kind of the wobble of on the Earth on its axis. So if you went back to that graph, you saw that change about every 100,000 years or so. That's natural occurring climate change. Unfortunately, what we've been seeing lately is huge amounts of changes just over the last 30 or 40 years. And is it the sun? In fact, a lot of people tell me that the output from the sun has been changing quite a bit. And it really hasn't. It stayed pretty constant. So the yellow line here is the total radiation, the amount of energy coming from the sun. It hasn't really changed at all since 1880, but the Earth's temperature has increased quite a bit. Is it the Earth's orbit? And absolutely would be if you could go back a couple 100,000 years. But since the Industrial Revolution, not enough change to cause this type of forcing in temperatures. Is it volcanoes? Yeah, volcanoes do put out a lot of ash and aerosols. And a lot of CO2. Of course, the CO2 would warm the atmosphere, but the aerosols actually reflect a lot of the sun's energy back into space. So it's a bit of a wash. You can look at all three and you can see that, you know, not much forcing here, very little forcing, but the temperature continues to rise. Now, the hottest years since 1880, and you can see that they've all been, you know, 2015, 2017, 2019, 2020 is almost the warmest year. So far, 2016 has been the warmest year, and the reason being is that 2015, 2016 was one of the strongest El Nino events we've ever seen before. And despite that, you know, we're seeing that 2020 is nearly as warm as 2016, despite being in a La Nina condition. And I put this graph 2 weeks ago in the Tribune, and this is basically the number of cold records and hot records, or low and high. And if the atmosphere was basically, you know, everything being equal, you know, over 30 years, which is the normal time frame for climatology at each weather station, you would expect to see the, you know, equal number of cold records and equal number of hot records. And that was the case in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. In the 80s, things started to change a little bit, the 90s, the 2000s. And you can see that the 2010s, how many more hot records there were than cold records. And of course, this year, about 94%, 94% of the records were warm up in Paso Robles, and only about 6% were cold. So it's definitely a trend there. July of 2019 was the Earth's hottest month on record of any year dating back since 1880. To me, it's just astounding. In fact, this past October was the warmest October in California's history. Climate change or temperature change is not uniform throughout the country. It has a lot of variance. You can see in the South, we're actually seeing a little bit of a cooling, like in Mississippi and Alabama. Here, this is really fascinating about California, the Central Coast. You know, a fair amount of warming, but the greatest amount of warming has occurred down in south of Point Conception, Malibu, going down the LA basin. What we think is going on is that as the Central Valley heats up, the thermal low over the Central Valley becomes more intense. You have the Eastern Pacific High out here. You have stronger northwesterly winds during the spring, summer, and fall. So consequently, that's producing upwelling. That's moderating the temperatures here. But you've probably all heard about sundowner winds. As those northwesterly winds go over the San Rafael, San Ynez mountain ranges, and they descend down into this area, you know, it's producing more warming. All right, it's just a trace gas, and it's true. I mean, we're only talking about 417 parts per million. Each molecule of CO2 is like a feather in a down comforter, helping to trap heat in the atmosphere. The same amount of carbon monoxide in our, I didn't put out, I should have corrected that. I didn't see that. In our air, 400 parts per million would render us, we'd all die, basically. And it's interesting to note that if you have a commercial driver's license, you know, if you have a blood alcohol content of 0.04, you're busted for a DUI. With a normal driver's license, it's 0.08. So basically, you know, if you have that amount of alcohol in your system and you got pulled over, you would be arrested for a DUI, driving under the influence. And there you go. So if you have a commercial driver's license with a blood alcohol content of 400 parts per million, it's a DUI. Okay, they said it was cooling in the 1970s. And here's a supposed picture of Time magazine back in the 1970s. And you can see this says 1977 up here. There's a picture of MASH, great TV show back then, Carol Burnett, and How to Survive the Coming Ice Age. 51 things you can do to make a difference. But the real cover is this. This is from the 1990s. You got the Sopranos up here in the right-hand corner. And you have the Global Warming Survival Guide, 51 things you can do to make a difference. So basically, somebody took this cover, and to do kind of a propaganda deal, they made this cover. All right, so there's a lot of misinformation out there, but this science has been around for a long, long time. Arianus was an absolute genius. He wrote about this in the late 1800s, and this is what he wrote. Just amazing. This is more than 100 and heck, almost 150 years ago. The furnaces of the world are now burning around 2 billion tons of coal a year. When this is burned, uniting with oxygen, it adds around 7 billion tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere yearly. This tends to make the air a more efficient blanket for the Earth and to raise its temperature. The effect may be significant in a few centuries. So here's Arianus writing this about 100 years ago. Now, people ask me, what's the difference between weather and climate? You know, basically it's snowing somewhere, not going to be a header. Well, weather is one play in a baseball game. Climate is the history of Major League Baseball. So one has to look at long-term trends over at least 30 years to get a good idea of what's transpiring. And the thermometers are all wrong. Heck, for 10 years, I took care of about 32 seawater temperature monitoring stations up and down the Pacho Coast. And this is what we found over millions and millions of data points, is that the previous all-time record for seawater temperatures, and this occurred during strong El Nino events, was 66.65 in 1983, 66.72 in 1997. That's a big leap. I know it's only a tenth of a degree, but back in 2015, we actually got up to 67.58 degrees. Absolutely remarkable. 2 years ago, we went snorkeling at Catalina Island in Avalon, and the seawater temperature there was 80 degrees. It was unbelievable. And down at Scripps, the temperature got up to 82.68 degrees Fahrenheit. Absolutely unprecedentedly warm seawater temperatures. And this is showing the average monthly Arctic sea ice extent from 1979 to 2016. And here's a little animation that I found that really illustrates this. And this starts back in 1979. And what this is showing is basically the area up in the Arctic that's covered with ice. And you know, some years it goes up, right? Like in 1981, we actually saw a nice increase in ice cover up in the Arctic, and some years it goes down, as you can see right here. So some years it goes up, some years it goes down, some years it goes down, sometimes the years goes up. That's why it's so crucial to look at long-term trends. And I think this video really illustrates that very, very clearly. Now, if you're a bit devious and you want to argue against climate change, yeah, you could cherry pick this and go from 1991 to about 1996. Look how the amount of ice increased, right? But if you look at the long-term trend, you could really see of really what's happening over the last 40 years or so. I hope that all makes a pretty good illustration. Unfortunately for this year, it may break a record for all-time low amount of ice. In Japan, when I went there, rice is a real big deal, but cherry blossoms are also a real big deal. And this goes back 800 years, and this shows the peak of the cherry blossoms, and they've kept pretty meticulous records of that. And you can see that the peak of the cherry blossoms of the bloom is getting earlier and earlier and earlier each year, which signifies a warmer climate. At Montana de Oro, a couple of grad students and one of the professors, they're basically trapping rattlesnakes. And the males have about a 1.5 square mile range. And during the winter, they go in a kind of a semi-hibernation, but then during the spring, they come out and they look for a mate. And so what they do is they actually put a little thermistor and a little GPS chip in each snake. And what they found is that these rattlesnakes are coming out earlier and earlier each year. I get this a lot. Climate science says it can predict the exact temperature within 50 years, within a half a degree, but needs a 1,000-mile margin of error for predicting the track of Irma over the next 4 days. Let that sink in. And that's true. You know, I'll give it to you. You cannot even predict tomorrow's weather, let alone 100 years from now. And a couple of marches ago, uh, you know, I drove from Diablo Canyon home to Los Osos. This is Los Osos Valley Road, and had the sun behind me to the west, and had this storm system coming in from the east. And I thought, man, I'm going to get some great rainbow pictures. And all I got was all this white stuff, and this white stuff happened to be snow, right? So it's something that I probably wouldn't predict snow. But you know what? If you ask me, hey, John, what's the weather going to be like in Avila Beach in the month of July? I'll tell you, you know, it'll probably be foggy and I'll probably be correct, right? So that's kind of the differences there. Sea level increase. When sea ice melts, it doesn't do anything. However, when you have iceberg melting and iceberg capping, that does increase sea level. And this is a composite graph or plot of all the tide gauges throughout the world since 1880 to today. If you drew a line, you would see an average rate of increase of 1.8 millimeters. If you went back in history since 1880 to 1920, 0.8 millimeters. From 1920s to 80s, it was 2.0 millimeters. And today we're up to about 3.2 millimeters per year. So you can see the amount of increase is accelerating. We brought together some of the best climate scientists in the entire world to determine what sea level would be like by 2100, 80 years from now. And we're predicting that sea level will probably be about 47 inches higher than it is today. Here's a map of Cambria showing the inundation. And there is some here on Santa Rosa Creek, but a lot of the community of Cambria is actually above, about 85 feet above sea level on these coastal terraces. But like I said before, we could have some issues there in Santa Rosa Creek and in some of the downtown areas. This is Cayucas, once again, not too bad. Heading down the Morro Bay, this is Morro Bay High School. I'm always worried about the cloisters here. That could be some issues. Head further south, and you can see that where the Museum of Natural History is, that's all going to be flooded out. Parts of the golf course will be flooded out there at the Morro Bay Golf Course. Head further south into Los Osos. I live right about there on 4th and El Morro. And you can see that there on 3rd Street, there is significant flooding. And also in Pasadena, there's some homes there. Cuesta by the sea could be Cuesta underneath the sea, all right? So these are really serious implications. Diablo Canyon, like Cambria, a lot of it's 85 feet above sea level, so really no issues as you head down the Point San Luis Lighthouse. Avila Beach, though, major issues. In fact, during high tide, there's the post office right here, the parking lot. That parking lot will flood out now during high tide. Head further south into Pismo Beach, that whole trailer court near the campground is going to be flooded out. And then we've seen implications of this. This is Highway 1 heading towards Ragged Point, and they basically had to redirect the highway because of severe coastal erosion. Air temperature change. We're thinking that by the end of the century, we'll probably have 6 degrees of temperature increase on average. And this is probably a pretty conservative line. It may be higher than that. Fires, I don't need to tell you how horrible the fires have been over the last years. This year, we're at 4.2 million acres of forest burned. Last year, the previous record was 2018, is about 2 million acres. So we've already doubled that record. And CAL FIRE determines that by 2050, we'll probably have about a 300% increase in wildfires. And we've already seen that. Another thing is atmospheric rivers are always an issue. And with a warmer atmosphere, we could have, basically they could hold more water moisture, more water vapor. So even though we're thinking there could be more droughts, when it does rain, that could be more severe. This is K and 4th Street in downtown Sacramento. And back in March of 1995, this was Cambria. So what you could do, well, first of all, just really quickly, we should all proudly live in San Luis Obispo County. Between Diablo and Topaz Solar Farm, we export more electricity, carbon-free electricity, in any other county in the United States. This is our power mix. This is really interesting graph. Despite California getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, and gross domestic product increasing, we're seeing our emissions cut. But if I was going to do one thing, I would drive an EV. That's the most significant thing you do in California, because our electricity is so clean, is to drive an electric vehicle. And there you go. And you can follow me on Twitter if you have a Twitter account. I put a lot of weather information, a lot of other stuff there. So I think I'm right on time there, Randy. So thank you so much.
Hey, am I on? Thank you, John. That was amazingly informative and somewhat scary at the same time. Wow. Okay, well, thank you so much, John. That was great for you to share that with us. We really appreciate it. So normally at this time, we receive offerings from our congregants. However, due to the virtual format of this service, we invite you to make your offering in one of the methods shown on this slideshow. These methods will also be posted in the newsletter and on the UUCC website itself. Please keep in mind that our congregation is entirely self-governed by the democratic process. One of the privileges of our free church tradition is to provide all of the financial support for many ministries from among ourselves. So generosity, therefore, is one of the spiritual values we recognize as central to our personal and institutional well-being. You are invited to participate in the blessing of giving by sending us an offering. Thank you.
Wow.
Our thanks for the gifts given and received for the work of this community. Nice job, Jan.
That's
Okay.
nothing but blue sky. That was great.
Yeah. Okay, let us now sing the doxology. From all that dwell below the skies, let faith
And hope with love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung through every land by every tongue.
Please join in singing the closing hymn, The Spacious Firmament on High, number 283.
The spacious firmament on high, with all the blue ethereal
feeling a little seasick.
I was going to say, you need to steady that ship.
All right. Please join in singing the closing hymn, The Spacious Firmament. Oh, I already did that. Take two. Let us now recite the valediction. We extinguish the flame of this chalice, and we know that the light of truth and love and the warmth of this community go with us until we meet again. It's done. Somebody put a trick candle in there. Okay. After the benediction, please click on the gallery view button in the upper right corner of your screen. John?
We need to unmute John. Oh,
I'm unmuted.
yay! Welcome back to another session of Global Weirding. Yoo-hoo! I'm Lindsey.
John?
I'm here, Randy.
You may deliver the closing words, if you would.
Oh, yeah. So Trish and I got married in Camry in the old Santa Rosa Chapel back in 1997. And one of the readings that we wrote was Corinthians 13:4-5. And I'm sure you've all heard this before, but for me, it's so true. And here we go. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy, does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrong. There you go, Randy.
Thank you, John.